Hi, I'm Dave Shuttler. I go by the professional nickname of the Bug Doc. In this lecture, I will cover the living realm, that is, all living things. More specifically, the primary goal of this lecture is to provide you with the biological terms used to describe living organisms and to give you a perspective as to where insects and arthropods fit among living things. What is life and living organisms? Sometimes it seems like a simple question, but it has confounded biologists for years, especially when theorists talk about other types of life that may occur in extreme environments or on other planets. Many of you probably state that living things grow, reproduce, and respire. On the Earth, all living organisms consist of cells, from single-celled bacteria and protozoa to large multi-celled organisms. All cells need some kind of energy in order to function. They may gather this energy from the sun through photosynthesis or get it from food. We also know that some microbes can get their energy from the heat and chemicals generated by the earth itself. All living cells have genetic material which is used to direct the cellular processes, especially DNA making RNA, which functions to construct proteins. This genetic material is passed on to offspring and often changes slightly over time. That is, it evolves. Biologists recognize that organisms use one of two types of cells. It is believed that the most basic of these cell types contains the genetic material loose within the cell, and this genetic material is not constrained within a membrane. All the bacteria have these types of cells, which are called prokaryotes, meaning before a kernel. Protozoa, fungi, plants, and animals have cells in which the DNA genetic material is kept constrained within a nuclear membrane. These are called eukaryotes, which simply means with a kernel. This kernel or nucleus is easily visible with stains. This illustration of a generalized bacterial cell shows that there is considerable complexity even within prokaryote cells. Most importantly, notice that the DNA genetic material is loosely contained within the central part of the cell. There are also distinctive differences in the cell wall makeup, the size of the ribosomes, where RNA makes proteins, and the way that flagella, when present, are constructed. These are illustrations of plant and animal eukaryote cells. You can immediately see that the DNA is contained within a defined nucleus, and there are numerous other complicated cellular structures called organelles. One of the most striking differences between plant and animal cells is the presence of the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll and the mechanisms for converting light energy into chemical energy or food. All of the organelle types, membranes, and flagella are beyond our current discussion. Early biologists generally recognized two types of living things: plants, including fungi, and animals. However, when microscopes were developed, the tiny microbial world was revealed, as was the complexities of cellular structure. For a while, biologists thought that there were only four groups: bacteria, protozoa, plants plus fungi, and animals. Through investigations of physiology and genetics, it soon became apparent that fungi were not just plants without chlorophyll, but very different organisms. This finally resulted in 5 major kingdoms that are commonly recognized today. More recent genetic studies have led more biologists to consider that the bacteria actually form two distinctive groups: the so-called normal bacteria and the bacteria of extremes, or archaea. Both of these groups are proving to be extremely diverse, and some biologists have elevated the various groups to the status of kingdoms. This leaves the eukaryotes in their own group, but with additional kingdoms being separated out, especially among the protozoa. The bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes are called domains by these biologists. While it is interesting in a biological sense, we are more concerned about where insects and arthropods fit in the eukaryote group. Now, as an example, this is a diagrammatic representation of the 3-domain system of grouping living organisms. Each of the major offshoots of these domains would be considered to be kingdoms. So, what are some of the characteristics of animals? Many would state that animals generally move and eat food. More technically, animals are cellular organisms. Animals also start as embryos formed from a joined haploid egg and sperm. The animal thus has diploid genetics, and the embryo develops through a blastula stage. Finally, animals must ingest food to supply their bodies with energy. Let's now look at the animal kingdom and its diversity. Most current biology books recognize between 25 to 35 phyla of animals, and some even more. In our treatment here, we are most interested in looking at some of the major phyla and the characteristics that are used to define them. We will see that there is a continual evolution of more and more complex body designs, from mere masses of cells, like sponges, to having defined tissues with 2 cell layers, like corals and jellyfish, to having 3 cell layers but no defined body cavity, like the little planaria, flukes, and tapeworms, to animals with 3 cell layers and a false body cavity, like the nematodes, to animals with true body cavities, like the segmented worms, mollusks, echinoderms, and chordates. We define most of the animal phyla according to the number of cellular layers, the type of body cavity that they have, and how the mouth and anus are formed in the embryo. Most animals start as a fertilized egg called a zygote. This single cell divides and divides, eventually forming a ball of cells called the blastula. As you can see, this is only 1 cell layer thick. The blastula infolds to make 2 cell layers, the ectoderm and the endoderm. This becomes the gastrula. The endoderm further divides to form a 3rd cell layer, the mesoderm, which we will discuss later. Animals with 3 cell layers are divided into 3 groups. The most basic of these has 3 solid cell layers but no space between these tissues. These animals would be called triploblastic, meaning 3 layers, and acoelomate, that is, without a body cavity. As we progress up the evolutionary scale, a cavity can occur between the endoderm and the mesoderm. This is called a pseudocoelom, or false body cavity. Finally, we find the mesoderm tissues line both the ectoderm and the endoderm tissues with a cavity in between. This is a true coelom, or true body cavity. The final major defining body plans that we need to discuss is how the mouth and anus are formed in the embryo. In one branch of the animals, the mouth is formed from the original blastopore. Remember that little ball of cells that got pushed in on one side? The anus is formed when the endoderm pushes through the blastula to the other side. These types of animals are called prostomates, or first mouth. The other major branch of animals have the anus formed through the original blastopore, and the mouth is formed by opening up the other end. These are called deuterostomates, or second mouth. As you look at these 2 phylogenetic trees, you'll see some of the terms that we have just defined. Notice that using different sets of characteristics changes the proposed relationships of the animal phyla. Now, this can be confusing to beginning biologists who want to know which one is correct. In fact, neither may be correct. As in all science, we are constantly finding new types of data, and each new data set will likely change our view of the relationships of animal groups. The greatest changes have occurred over the last several decades, where we have moved from strictly morphological data, the tree shown on the left, to including genetic and physiological data, the tree on the right. Now let's quickly review some of the major animal phyla to see where insects and arthropods fit. Sponges are considered to have the most primitive type of body organization. While sponges can form some relatively complicated structures, their bodies lack true tissues or organs. The Cnidara include corals, sea anemones, jellyfish, and the freshwater hydra. These animals have 2 defined tissue layers which can be organized into definite organs, and these animals have true radial symmetry. Oh, and the mouth and anus are the same opening. The platyhelminthes are called flatworms, which include free-living flatworms like the planaria, but also include two parasitic groups, the flukes and tapeworms. Flatworms have bilateral symmetry, 3-cell layers, but no body cavity. Platyhelminths are often important to entomology because arthropods can serve as intermediate hosts, especially for tapeworms. In this illustration, you can see that the common cat and dog tapeworm are transmitted through fleas. The flea larvae eat tapeworm eggs that have been defecated from an infested animal. The tapeworm egg hatches if a flea larva eats it. The little tapeworm larva encysts in the flea muscles, and if the flea is eaten by a cat or dog, the encysted larva emerges and completes its development in the intestine of the cat or dog, thereby completing the life cycle. The nematoda is a fairly large and diverse phylum which contains the animals known as roundworms. Roundworms can be free-living scavengers or predators and parasites of plants and animals. They have 3 cell layers and a false body cavity. Because they have no respiratory or circulatory system, they have to be in constant motion in order to move fluids in the false body cavity. Nematodes are important in entomology because some are beneficial biological controls and some are carried by insects, that is vectored, and these nematodes can cause plant or animal illnesses. Now we're going to move into the animal phyla that have 3 cellular layers and a true body cavity. However, the origin of the mouth and anus is distinctly different. The segmented worms, mollusks, and arthropods are prostomates, while the echinoderms and chordates are deuterostomates. The Annelida are called segmented worms, and the major classes include the earthworms, marine segmented worms, and the parasitic leeches. These animals are triploblastic prostomic coelomates. Now, are you getting used to those terms yet? They are also characterized by having elongate bodies consisting of numerous similar segments. Each segment has internal compartments separated by thin sheets of tissue. The segments can have external flaps or extensions, but these are not segmented. They have a closed circulatory system, often with many contractile vessels or hearts, and a ventral nerve cord. The mollusca has 7 classes, but the gastropoda, snails and slugs, pelecypoda, clams, oysters, and scallops, and the cephalopoda, squids, octopuses, and the chambered nautilus, are the most notable groups. Mollusks represent the second largest animal phylum, only being outnumbered by the arthropoda and close to the numbers in the chordata. Most mollusks have an exoskeleton consisting of a calcium carbonate shell, and the evidence of segmentation is lost in most groups. Our final prostomate animal group is the arthropoda. This phylum is the largest of all animal phyla, with some estimating that there will eventually be 1 to 2 million species described. Animals in this phylum have an exoskeleton that must be shed during growth, external segmented appendages, a ventral nerve cord, but they have an open circulatory system called a hemocoel. The echinoderms are an ancient group of animals, but only about 7,000 species exist today, and all are marine animals. Starfish, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers are common classes found today. While some would say that echinoderms have a radial symmetry, this is just an outward appearance. They are true deuterostomates, having the origin of the mouth and anus opposite that of the annelids, mollusks, and arthropods. Echinoderms are characterized by having a complicated hydraulic system that operates tube feet, and an internal skeleton consisting of calcium carbonate plates or elements. The last phylum we'll cover is sometimes called the chordata, but this is often divided into 3 separate phyla: the Urochordata, or tunicates and sea squirts, the Cephalochordata, or lanceolates, and the Craniata, or chordates with the brain contained in a defined chamber. The Craniata would also be called the Vertebrata in some books. This phylum is a deuterostomate, and the skeletal structures are internal. The nerve cord is dorsal, and the circulatory system is closed within a well-defined coelom. The chordata contains about 47,000 species, which makes it the third largest phylum of animals. In summary, the arthropods are triploblastic animals with a true coelom, and they are also prostomates. Remember those terms? They also have a chitinous exoskeleton that must be shed during growth. Inside, they have a ventral nerve cord and an open circulatory system. This is a very successful group of animals represented by nearly 1 million described species. In this lecture, we have rushed through many terms that are used to describe the living realm. Hopefully, this will simply be a review of those terms that you have learned in a previous biology class. Now, for others, these terms will be relatively new. In any case, feel free to replay this presentation. Use some of the provided study aids and try out some of the review questions that cover the morphological terms and the biological taxa that we've discussed.